Breakfast host Alan Jones likes to air his listeners' factual opinions about Julia Gillard too, like this email from Colin.
Another one says, please, don't have that lying bitch on your program again. I had to move the dial to another station. I guess it was worth the once to show us all what a beep lying, beep backstabbing, beep treacherous, beep she is. Thanks, Colin.
On the 13th of April 1941, a young man will be born in a rural Queensland town, and he would change the landscape of Australian media broadcasting forever. This change was for the worse. Since 1985, this gentleman has been one of the most profitable shock jocks on radio, and since 2013 has been a host on Sky News, providing some truly incredible hot takes and opinions.
Every single thing that happens today is climate change. Kids in schools are being brainwashed. Do Australians know what's being taught in the classroom? Marxist crap about gender fluidity. A boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy. And if you thought coronavirus had tanked the economy, Joe Biden's climate change plan is the equivalent of taking a bazooka to it. As you know, in this country, freedom of speech is the property of the left. They can say whatever they like about you and get away with it. So children march in the streets crying because some 16-year-old girl tells them they should fear for their future. This is the new religion. It's everywhere. Look where we are in identity politics. It's not about how good you are, but it's now about gender and race and skin colour.
A man who refused to keep his mouth shut long after he should have been thrown off air. Tonight we say, Alan Jones, this is your life. Copyright claim pending.
In the woodpile here, if one can use that expression.
This is a new show I am pioneering, and this totally counts as satire. I can't be sued. Taking a look at famous media personalities and showing just how many times they've personally made the world a worse place. And where better to start than with one of the giants of Australian media broadcasting. A man who has almost single-handedly turned the Australian media landscape into the partisan hellscape it is today. Now, there will be plenty of viewers out there who have no idea who this old hack is, because I have a few viewers in different countries who are, you're very lucky you've never heard of Alan Jones. So I'm going to cut straight to the meat and veggies. Alan Belford internalised homophobia Jones was born in rural Queensland in the early 40s and quickly rose to be good at a couple things and very bad at most others. His good qualities include coaching rugby, making money for corporate interests, getting sued for defamation. His bad qualities include repeated overt sexism against powerful women, helping to incite a race riot, climate change denial, and most recently, doubting the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, little column A, little column B, I guess. Today, we're going to focus on all of those bad qualities, because I don't really care how good at coaching rugby you are when you're an all-round terrible human being. So let's talk about what Alan is best known for. His varied sexist comments against powerful female leaders. In 2012, Alan was speaking at the Sydney University Liberal Club, a fun hip-hopping venue full of young conservatives full of their own varied controversies, such as calling for non-Christians to be stripped of the right to celebrate Christmas and Easter holidays, and reintroducing the death penalty, amongst other things, but I digress. During the speech, staunch conservative and family values advocate Alan referred to the father of the then current Prime Minister Julia Gillard and said,
"The old man must be knifing his go shame to think that he had a daughter and told lies to know she couldn't parliament."
Now, Alan was rightly condemned for this and tried to call the PM to apologise, but she refused the call, and I laugh in his face because of it. Now, this wasn't his first run-in with Prime Minister Gillard. Oh, no. Alan has made plenty of comments about her premiership. It all started in 2011, when the Right Honourable Jules was working with crossbench members of Australian Parliament to pass unprecedented climate control legislation. And at the same time, the Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore was attempting to close many laneways and parking spaces to cars within the CBD. Now, on the 29th of June 2011, Al here took it upon himself to disabuse the duo on his radio show and said,
Put her in the same chaff bag as Julia Gillard and throw them both out to sea.
Not the best look, advocating violence against women. And you'd think that would be the worst it gets, but of course it isn't. As earlier that very same year, when Gillard was on his show, he asked her directly to her face about derogatory nicknames that protesters had been giving her, such as Julia, and said, people are saying that we've got a liar running the country. Not the most balanced interview you've ever listened to, which you'd expect from a partisan hack. But I can tell you now that he definitely didn't treat previous Labor PM, Kevin Rudd, in the same way, nor did he ask current Prime Minister Scott Morrison about his many pejorative nicknames like Scummo, the liar from the Shire, and the classic Scotty from marketing. But these comments aren't what allegedly finally got Jones thrown off radio for good. In August 2019, our pal Al made an on-air remark about Scotty from marketing and the current New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. During the 2019 Pacific Islands Forum held in Tuvalu, Ardern criticised the Australian government for their inaction on climate change. Some criticism that was honestly incredibly correct. In his response, Alan said,
Hope Scott Morrison gets tough here with a few backhanders. Hasn't got a clue, this woman. She's a clown, Jacinda Ardern, a complete clown. I just wonder whether Scott Morrison's going to be fully briefed to shove a sock down the throat. I mean, she is a joke, this woman, and an absolute and utter lightweight.
Only a little bit violent from a man with a demonstrable history of violent language towards women. Oh, you thought I was done? In 2012, again on former PM Gillard, Jones said she, the Prime Minister, said that we know societies only reach their full potential if women are politically participating. Women are destroying the joint. Christine Nixon in Melbourne, Clover Moore here, honestly. In 2017, Jones seemingly referred to the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, when he tweeted 11.3 million. Can you believe it? You can guess what many people would rather hang 58 metres over George Street, and it's not a cloud arch. And again in 2017, Jones referred to New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian's head as though it were in a noose due to her government's mining policy, of all things, to refer to someone's head in a noose about. It's almost as if Jones has some deeply rooted issues with women. Lucky for us, and by us I mean people who like shady content about bad people, and unlucky for people who are in minority groups that he has besmirched over the years. They're not the only ones. We're going to have to talk about Alan Jones's latent racism. In 1995, Jones was on air discussing a racial discrimination case against a real estate agent who refused to rent a flat to an Indigenous woman, when he said, I don't care what colour he is, looking at a skunk and smelling like a skunk with a sardine can on one foot and a sand shoe on the other and a half-drunk bottle of beer under the arm, and he wanted to rent the final property available and it was mine, I would expect the agency to say no. Well, first, Jones got the gender of the victim entirely wrong. So he obviously knew a lot about the case. And secondly, the case hadn't hinged on how the woman had presented herself. It hinged on the fact that the agent had said there were no flats available and then rented a flat to his white friend. Jones didn't mention that, but you probably knew that already. In 1997, Jones was involved in two separate disparaging incidents. The first was when he made the entirely baseless claim that an Indigenous woman, Mary Lou Buck, was fraudulently making a native title claim. She sued for defamation and won, and later that year, he was sued again, this time by Elder Patrick Dodson, for implying that Dodson had exploited his Aboriginality and had his snout in the public trough when he was chairing a land rights conference. That is 3 strikes against him on Indigenous affairs, and you know what? He kept his job for another 2 decades. That's not even his worst offence. He has used an N-word on air twice.
The in the woodpile here, if one can use that expression.
And called for a new stolen generation. For those outside of Australia, the stolen generation were the children of Indigenous Australians taken from their families and raised in white communities, with the intent of civilising the Aboriginality out of them. Over 20,000 families were forcibly separated in what can be described and should be described as a genocidal act by a white supremacist system. And Jones wants to bring it back. Alan Jones is a bad person. And I'm still not done with racism. Finally, Alan Jones incited a race riot. Quite literally. Some of the darkest days in the history of racism in Australia are the Cronulla riots, which took place on the 11th and 12th of December 2005. On the 11th, a group of 5,000 people gathered on Cronulla Beach to protest and party. But the mood changed when a man of Middle Eastern appearance was spotted on the beach and was attacked by the mob. 2 boys from Bangladesh had bottles thrown at them and were subjected to racial slurs, most of them for ethnic groups that these men weren't a part of. 3 other men had beer bottles thrown at them, and by the end of the riots, approximately 50 Arab Australians had been assaulted, and travel warnings were issued by quite a few Middle Eastern countries. Now, what does Alan Jones have to do with this? Well, in the week leading up to the event, Jones read on air multiple emails and text messages from people who would later participate in the riots and from those who supported them. These include the widely disseminated, "Come to Cronulla this weekend to take revenge. Get down to North Cronulla to support Leb and Wog Bashing Day," which Jones tacitly endorsed. He also supported the suggestion that bikie gangs should be brought down to Cronulla railway station to deal with Lebanese thugs, and referred to people from the Middle East as grubs. What kind of grubs? Well, I'll tell you what kind of grubs this lot were. This lot were Middle Eastern grubs. And most egregiously, when a listener rang in to rebut Jones and advise him that she had personally heard really derogatory remarks aimed at Middle Eastern people, Jones interrupted her by saying, "We don't have Anglo-Saxon kids out here raping women in Western Sydney." Jones was fined and censured for his remarks, but remained a mainstay of Australian media broadcasting for another decade and a half. He still has a cable news show, free to espouse plenty of other disgusting views. I haven't even talked about how he doesn't believe man-made climate change exists, even though it is an irrefutable fact that he ignores because he is a putrid human being. And the Australian Communications and Media Authority agrees with me on this. He's flip-flopped on COVID-19, changing position to whatever suits him politically and monetarily, and he's also virulently anti-China. Not for any good reason, but rumours about China, the state, buying up Australian devalued assets because of COVID. He's just an old racist, sexist man. Every time this man would run his mouth, protests would occur, sanctions drawn up, petitions signed, and advertisers pressured. But eventually the heat would die down, and he would be allowed to go back to work. After 3.5 decades in the media broadcasting industry, this obtuse, disgusting hack was allowed to quietly retire, with the Prime Minister of Australia calling in to his final show to offer his thanks. If there was ever a man who deserved a little bit of cancel culture, it is Alan Jones. Now, Alan, I am sure you're watching because I think that you're a disgraced, privileged narcissist. How do you think this one went? You know, first episode of This Is Your Life. Again, copyright claim pending. I tried to be as unbiased as possible, which was surprisingly easy because most of the worst days of your career were bad enough that everyone called you out. You're gonna die soon. Probably. You're old. And I won't shed a tear. I don't really care for you. But I hope somebody watching this video, maybe a Facebook friend of a Facebook friend of a Facebook friend, who had a little bit of respect for you, will watch this. And they'll know that your legacy is nothing but racism, sexism, climate denial, and being a dickhead. Thanks to viewer Jonathon for suggesting more Australian content. Calling Alan Jones a hack really gave me a warm feeling in my lower intestine.